From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead for you today, K-State's Dan O'Brien, commenting on the grain trade's response to yesterday's USDA grain supply and demand report. Dan also looks at the current corn-to-soybean price ratio as a reflection on planting decisions this spring. Then K-State's Romulo Lollato is back with us, this time to talk about likely reasons why some winter wheat stands are turning yellow right now. Having nothing to do with freeze damage, he points to the possibility of a nutrient deficiency as one potential explanation, and what, if anything, you growers can do about that now. And later we'll hear from K-State's Mary Knapp on the Kansas agricultural weather outlook. All that and more coming your way next on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
This is Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Welcome once again. We catch up once more with Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, for his weekly insight on the grain trades, which were, Dan, playing off yesterday in fair part the USDA's latest grain supply and demand report. The corn market, to be specific, was keying in on what the stocks and demand numbers were going to look like, especially in respect to ethanol demand for corn, which was anticipated to be sharply lower of late.
It was a market of two different minds. The USDA numbers, if you just take the supply-demand balances and things that shifted around, you had a pretty negative day, but yet as prices moved, we saw generally some pretty positive response in the market yesterday as things went on. Corn closed up about 1 3/4 cents. On the supply-demand balance sheet, the USDA predictably cut back on ethanol production. Well, ethanol corn use tied to production by about 375 million bushels, and offset that sum by raising feed residual use by 150, and exports were left unchanged. So the net of it all were that stocks were raised. The estimate of stocks for this 2019-20 marketing year, that'll end August 31st, were raised by 200 million bushels. Stocks to use jumped up to 15.5%. They did drop the price estimate by about 20 cents down to 360, which, we're just bouncing around right now. And we're towards the end of that marketing year, well, in the latter part of this, so down to 360. On the feed grain side also, if you look at grain sorghum, there was some pretty dramatic changes on the grain sorghum side. We've talked about strength in grain sorghum exports of late, and so the USDA came in on their balance sheet for grain sorghum, raised the export figure by 50 million bushels from 135 up to 185. And in the midst of doing that, then compensated for it by lowering feed usage, lowering food seed industrial usage, a lot of that mainly ethanol, chopped those both back, left the ending stocks the same. So this ongoing story of how grain sorghum now is getting business again is a big thing. And when you look at basis levels in the last few days here, it's grain sorghum basis levels at major export-oriented terminals around Kansas that are moving to the higher side. So interesting to watch. And grain sorghum, after being probably the first commodity to take the hit in the U.S.-China trade war, is one of the commodities that's coming out of it probably as good as possible. And when you look at the corn versus sorghum price ratio down in the major feeding area down in southwest Kansas, you've got that ratio now of cash sorghum prices in Garden City, about 312, cash corn prices 331 and 3/4. Neither of those are wonderful prices, but the ratio of sorghum to corn is now about 94%, had been 86, 88, something like that for a good long while.
Interesting dynamics there. Want to talk a bit more, though, about the WASDE report and stocks and the fact that the numbers were bearish fairly well across the board, commodity to commodity here.
Yes, the wheat supply-demand balance sheet for this market year again, and that's the one that will end at the end of May, saw the ending stocks raised about 30 million bushels up to 970 million. Ending stocks from about 43% up to 45%. And what happened was that the USDA had lowered export projections. They had jumped up to about a billion bushels in the March report, and now here in the April report dropped that back by 30 million bushels. They did also lower feed residual usage for wheat, their projection of it. And with so much corn around, low prices, that makes sense. Again, when you look at both futures and cash price ratios for corn versus wheat, the futures are at a ratio of about 1.5 thereabouts, and the cash price in the Garden City area where we'd be feeding the wheat largely if we were going to do it. The cash wheat price in Garden was about 449. Again, cash corn price about 331. So gosh, at that type of price differential, you're not feeding near as much wheat unless it fits a particular point right in your ration. So that's a big deal. I would say also that for soybeans, we also saw, following on the same trend of stocks being higher, that soybean stocks were raised for this market year, again, the one ending August 31st, up to 480 million bushels. That's up about 55. And to get there, exports were dropped by about 50 million bushels. We did see crush increase by 20. So there's the issue that, the dynamic happening in that soybean market. We've had pretty good crush, and really exports of soybean meal have been very, very good. Where would soybean prices be without strength in the soybean meal market is a fair question. Combine that with some export business that came yesterday, and you saw soybean futures after that report close up 9 cents for May. And really that 9-cent gain held all the way through May, July, August, into September, and still had about a 7.75 cent gain in the November contract. So here we had bearish numbers, and the market looked at current information and it responded positively for the most part. One bit of positive I forgot to talk about has to do with for corn. We did see for the week ending April the 2nd, 51 million bushels of export movement. I think that's the highest amount of corn export movement for the whole year. So what was happening? Well, buyers saw an opportunity at those low prices, and low prices do shake the branches, I guess. Even at a high U.S. dollar value, still those low prices enticed movement. Eric, and you stand back and look at these bigger picture issues, logistics as they're affected by the coronavirus, both in our country and also overseas, are kind of really a wild card this year. Will our South American neighbors be able to meet their export obligations as they hope to? Well, they may or they may not. Again, they're struggling with some of these same issues that we are. And you do hear of dryness and concerns about having adequate food supplies over in the Black Sea region, as well as other countries. And buyers seeing some of these issues, they have no motivation to not build their stocks up. So you probably have a situation where up front you've got fears about having adequate food supplies really affecting the market. And if the United States can maintain our logistical system at a fairly efficient mode, it will certainly help us in terms of meeting some of these world demand needs, where, especially for wheat and for these other crops, where at different points, at different times, for different periods, there'll be some struggles along the way for other buyers and sellers around the globe.
Well, Dan, you've referred to it a couple of times. You have worked up in your grain market notes this week the futures and cash price ratios as of yesterday, April the 9th, and taking up the corn to soybean price ratio about this time every spring. We look to that as maybe a harbinger of decisions on planting corn versus soybeans. So what do those numbers tell us?
And what a harbinger it is. In corn prices, futures and cash have fallen off enough relative to soybeans that now you've got a current crop ratio of May soybeans versus May corn at about 2.59. You get 863 as a closing futures price yesterday for May futures for beans, and about 331 or so for corn. So you end up at about a 2.5, 2.6 price ratio. relative to soybean prices over corn. New crop bids right at 2.5, and generally you get above 2.4, 2.3, your advantage soybeans. Well, this all feeds into this narrative, and a narrative is just a narrative. It feeds into what farmers are going to decide to do off the tractor seat, in terms of what on their marginal acres that they aren't already heartily committed to for corn, do they look at this price differential now and the action that we've seen the last 1 or 2 weeks and start, at least on the margin, shift some of those acres over to the soybean side. That's probably going to happen. The 97 million acre projection could fall by some degree. Will that be a lot? Is it 96? Is it 95? We'll have to see. But for the acres lost to corn, they're probably going to soybeans. And we won't have an official number on that until we get the acreage report at the end of June.
And one quick final thing, we've more freezing temperatures rolling in over the coming days, according to the forecast, which we'll detail further with K-State's Mary Knapp later on in the broadcast. Is the wheat market going to take stock of that, even more so than it has already, the potential freeze damage to winter wheat?
Well, it did yesterday. May futures closed up 14 cents. That's no small potatoes in these markets these days. So May at 4.92, July futures 4.99, just under 5, up 13.75 cents. So there's concern about all that, and that would be on top of whatever damage we had within the last week or so from previous freeze. So at a time when there's a lot of sensitivity to having adequate domestic food supplies, we've got freeze events potentially affecting U.S. hard red winter wheat crop. So it adds to the buying upward pressure in the wheat market. And the one thing that we're probably not going to be doing a lot this year is tearing up a lot of wheat acres to put other crops in, because wheat right now is carrying the torch as well as any of our crops that we're seeing here in Kansas anyway.
Unless the crop is frozen out. And then you may see some tillage.
We may not have a choice, right. and then we'll go forth.
Dan's weekly analysis of the grain market factors is posted on agmanager.info, so check that out. Dan, thanks once again. Take care.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, on our opening part of Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, and back with us as well is wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato of K-State Research and Extension. Earlier in the week, we spoke with Romulo about the possibility of freeze damage to the winter wheat crop in Kansas from last week's hard freeze across a fair swath of the state. But here, we want to look more generally at the wheat crop we see, and some yellowing that may be turning up within those stands, irrespective of freeze damage here. Is this something that is showing up with some regularity out there, Romulo? What are your observations so far?
Hi, Eric. This time of the year, usually we start getting some calls and some emails from either producers or county agents as well with wheat that is turning yellow, right? What's happening to my crop? It's kind of turning yellow. What are the potential causes for that? And so if we think about it, there are several different causes that could be, and of course this is going to be field specific, but there are a few that are maybe a little bit more common that we could actually discuss, and perhaps the producers would say, well, this is probably what's going on in my field, right? So there's definitely a few causes that are more common, and they typically happen every year around this time of the year.
Well, let's walk through the possibilities that could be leading to that yellowing wheat. One that rises to the top right away, and we've visited about this in past years as well, nitrogen deficiency, just a matter of that wheat crop being a little short on N availability.
Yeah, so if we would group these, there are a few of them that would be related to fertility. So what's happening with the wheat crop now, and why are we starting to see some nutrient deficiencies? Think about the plant and the amount of growth that it has now in the spring, right? Typically, it starts spring green up. It's actually very small. There's maybe 3-4 tillers out there. And then it goes from a crop that has almost no biomass at all to a crop that might have 10 tons or 15 tons of biomass per acre there, right, from tillering through grain fuel. So right now is when the plant really needs a lot of those nutrients. What happens there is that sometimes there is a mismatch of the nutrient requirements by the plant, where it's wanting to grow and really take up as much as possible, and the nutrients supplied by the soil, right? So in cases where producers already put out nitrogen fertilizer, sulfur fertilizer, were perhaps less probable that we're going to see any of these deficiencies. But in cases where producers are maybe just a little bit late, or they put the nitrogen, but they didn't put the sulfur, and maybe the soil is a low organic matter soil, we might see some of that deficiency now, while temperatures are still relatively cool and we don't have many nutrients being released by the organic matter. So you mentioned nitrogen deficiencies, and that's a very common one. We're going to see the plant generally turn yellow. Nitrogen is a mobile nutrient within the plant. So what we see is that it moves from the old leaves to the new leaves. So it goes from the old and bottom leaves to those newer growth in the top. So typically we see the nitrogen deficiency in those lower leaves. You start to see those older leaves, lower leaves become yellow, kind of go towards a pale color. And if deficiency is really severe, we're going to have stunting of the plants. We're going to have the entire canopy really kind of turning that light green. Another nutrient that is very similar to nitrogen, but the only difference is that the crop really needs it in a lower amount, is sulfur. So similarly to nitrogen, now is the time when the plants need to take up most of the sulfur. And a lot of the sulfur comes out of the organic matter. And so because it's still relatively cold, the organic matter is not releasing a lot of that sulfur, not mineralizing. So we can see sulfur deficiency happen at this point in time. Now, a very important difference in the sulfur deficiency compared to the nitrogen one is that inside the plant, sulfur is not mobile. So remember, nitrogen is mobile, so it goes from the old growth to the new growth. So we see the deficiency in the old growth. Sulfur, on the other hand, is immobile in the plant. And so perhaps we're going to see the old growth be okay, and we're going to see a lot of the new growth, the top leaves, really turn light green and sometimes even turn yellow. So the main difference there is that we see the position in the plant where we see the deficiency, right? Nitrogen being in the lower leaves, sulfur being more on the upper leaves. And again, depending on the level of deficiency, we can see the whole crop suffer, so the whole canopy turn kind of like that brighter green type of color that we see in a sulfur deficiency. So those are two very common causes, Eric, that are led by fertility.
And can either of these be, at this late juncture, corrected somehow with a very late application of either N or sulfur?
Yes. Actually, if there is moisture in the soil, both nutrients will be uptaken relatively quick by the plant, and we can see that difference in a matter of a week. If we apply the fertilizer and there's some rainfall to incorporate into the soil, it's a matter of a week until we actually start seeing perhaps a very different crop from what it did last week. Actually, this was working with a county agent in Sedgwick County. He sent me some photos of a field there that was sulfur deficiency, and in a matter of a week, where the grower put out a strip of AMS, well, it was actually looking like day and night. So it's a relatively quick fix. At this point, I don't think we have seen much of a yield loss yet. Perhaps fields that are very advanced, let's say second node in the south central part of the state, showing severe levels of deficiency, might not fully recover. But some research from Oklahoma State on nitrogen timing was really showing that we can wait until that first or even second node, and as long as there is rainfall incorporated into the soil, we might not really see much of a yield loss there. So definitely still time to fix that.
But you have to inspect your fields first to see what's going on and do consider the possibility of either a nitrogen or a sulfur deficiency in those yellowed stands. But it may not have anything to do directly with nutrient deficiencies. It could be this condition, the direct result of poor root growth, you point out, Romulo.
Yeah, so depending on the field conditions, right, we might see some poor root growth. So, for example, if the roots started growing and found a very, very dry topsoil or compacted topsoil as well, right, it would actually limit the root development to that very shallow layer of soil. And again, this crop might not be able to access nutrients and water as well as if it had a fully developed rooting system. So it's a different cause, right? It's not necessarily the deficiency of the nutrient itself, but in the end, it's because the plant wouldn't be able to access those nutrients. We have a whole different set of causes. Some of them are weather-related, Eric. So we have had a couple of cold spells here in the last few weeks. And remember, it might take a good 7 to 10 days for us to see any effect from that cold spell. But we have seen where that cold spell can actually cause some leaf dieback, some burn down of those leaves, and that could turn the field or parts of the field to turn yellow or to lose some of that green that it had originally. In those cases, as long as the developing head maintains healthy, if it's just leaf burn down, we typically don't see much of a yield loss there. It's important to note as well that could depend, especially in this time of the year, the variety maturity would play a huge role there. So a variety that released from the winter dormancy earlier and perhaps is already getting to the jointing stage would possibly suffer more from these recent cold spells than a variety that is just now getting to that first hollow stem or just now or that was released later, right? So a variety maturity playing a role there in the crop's ability to withstand any cold injury.
Well, it all comes back to Romulo, producers assessing their fields one by one if this yellowing is turning up, having some sort of a notion as to what's behind that yellow cast to their stands. And they really need to scout to try to pin down what is happening before they take any action otherwise.
Definitely. These different causes, they have different symptoms, right? And that's how we identify each one of them. And also they have different solutions, right? And so for us to really know what's happening in the field, or for us to really be able to take an informed decision on what to do in the field, we need to know what's actually going on. Of course, producers are always welcome to reach out to their extension agents in their county or in that district. And the agents, they typically go straight to us, and we have a pretty good line of communication there. So, yes, just make sure that you use the resources that are available through K-State to help solve any of those issues in your area.
And they can, by the way, as we've reminded folks many times, contact you directly via social media to ask those very questions.
Definitely, yes. So for those who are on Twitter or on Facebook, at KSU Wheat on either platform would actually reach me directly there. And so growers are more than welcome to just put a tweet out and tag me, and I'll do my best to help out however I can.
Great. It's as simple as KSU Wheat. Romulo, thanks as always. Take care, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you, Eric.
Some thoughts on yellowing winter wheat and what might be behind that off-colored wheat stand. That's Romulo Lollato, wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so stay a minimum of 6 feet away from others and stay home if you can. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and coming your way next, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. The USDA has released information stating that farmers do indeed qualify for that third COVID-19 aid package relative to small business loans operated by the Small Business Administration. That stimulus plan contained $349 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, that is a guaranteed loan program administered by SBA, noting by the USDA that the purpose of the program is to support small businesses and to help support their payroll during the coronavirus situation. The USDA said that farmers are indeed eligible for those loans, that producers, farmers, ranchers with 500 or fewer employees whose principal place of residence is in the U.S. are eligible. The USDA also noted a farm can qualify if the maximum net worth of the business is not more than $15 million, and the average net income of the business for the 2 full fiscal years before the date of application be not more than $5 million. Now to note, K-State will be hosting this coming Monday morning a question and answer webinar on the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program for farmers and for cooperatives. Again, this will take place this coming Monday from 11 to noon. The Kansas Cooperative Council and the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center here at K-State will be hosting this forum for farmers and leaders to respond to questions about the program, like how to apply, new developments with it, and if one receives PPP funds, how do they manage them appropriately? There'll be a panel of experts available to answer questions, these and more. That panel including lawyers, accountants, lenders familiar with the SBA, economists, and individuals who are current on the plan developments. The directors of the Kansas Farm Management Program will be on hand and will be able to handle farmer questions as well. So they ask you to register soon at agmanager.info, agmanager.info. Again, this coming Monday morning, April the 13th, from 11 to noon, a question and answer webinar on the Small Business Administration's Paycheck Protection Program for farmers and for cooperatives. Take advantage of that opportunity. The USDA has lowered its price projections for livestock and livestock products as the demand situation has changed. That was part of the USDA's WASDE report yesterday. And the USDA's Gary Crawford takes a look at that aspect.
The nation's livestock sector appears to be adjusting to the effects of COVID-19 and the slower global economy, and USDA analysts on Thursday adjusted their livestock industry forecasts as well. Compared to a month ago, they cut 2020 production forecast for everything except pork. A quick look first, beef. USDA now projecting output 27.4 billion pounds, down by 255 million from March, so not even a 1% cut, but USDA dropping by 3% its average steer price forecast. For pork, add a tiny bit less than 1% to USDA's previous production forecast, but hog prices expected to average only $40 a hundredweight. Compared to the March forecast, that's down $8 or 16%. Broilers, USDA dropping its production forecast by 2%, its price forecast by 14.5%. Meanwhile, USDA milk production forecast is about the same as it was in March, but the demand drastically less, so USDA dropping its 2020 all milk price forecast by 20%. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Well, the coronavirus outbreak has obviously caused disruptions far and wide. The wheat industry and the agencies that support it are going the extra mile to assure that wheat continues to flow through market channels, including the export trade. Marcia Boswell takes a closer look on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
For the better part of a century, the United States has been known as the breadbasket of the world. Today, that reputation continues ringing as true as ever, at a time when it may be needed most. Reliability and certainty go hand in hand. That is why the U.S. export grain industry and the government agencies that protect and promote U.S. agriculture snapped into action when the first COVID-19 shelter-in-place orders forced many workers to stay home. Individual businesses developed mitigation plans, including more cleaning shifts and personal protective equipment for employees. Workarounds were found to limit staff member contact and to ensure trade could continue to flow, even when items as routine as loading paperwork were being curtailed. It wasn't just private businesses that took steps to keep wheat exports flowing smoothly. While other countries used bureaucratic delays on regular functions, such as permits and inspections, to slow down exports, the U.S. Federal Grain Inspection Service issued a public letter stating they would take all necessary steps to ensure export inspection services would continue unabated. The Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, issued a similar letter, promising to continue critical inspections and issuance of phytosanitary certificates. Both agencies clearly understand that maintaining U.S. agricultural exports is vital, not just to the U.S. economy, but also to meeting our commitments to our partners around the world. USDA wasn't the only federal agency to recognize that U.S. farmers need to stay on the job. The Department of Homeland Security is responsible for providing federal guidance in national emergencies, especially concerning critical industries. In less than a month, they have expanded the guidance defining essential workers and should, therefore, stay on the job in the event of stay-at-home or shelter-in-place orders to include the entire grain supply chain. That guidance includes workers in transportation, inspections, production, input suppliers, and even businesses providing repair services. Keeping those businesses running keeps U.S. farms running and helps give our overseas customers peace of mind. As we saw at a container facility in the Port of Houston, when a worker tested positive for COVID-19, there will no doubt still be small disruptions as we work through this uncertain time. But with government and industry commitments to maintaining supply chains, wheat will continue to flow to customers at home and abroad from the U.S. breadbasket. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Many thanks, Marcia. Might note here that K-State Research and Extension has been hard at it in recent days and weeks, gathering and getting out COVID-19 information, which can be accessed from the website ksre.ksu.edu. That includes daily podcasts on various aspects of contending with the changes prompted by COVID-19. Again, get to all of that at ksre.ksu.edu. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today is back now as we move ahead into our weekly look at Kansas agricultural weather. Joining us once more online is Mary Knapp, climatologist with K-State Research and Extension. We had more of the conventional spring weather in Kansas this week, Mary, with summer warmth and then the chill of freezing temperatures overnight.
Right. It really has been a roller coaster. For the first 7 days of April, we went from a high of 90 degrees to a low of 10. The 10 degrees was seen out in western Kansas. Sharon Springs in Wallace County hit that low on the 4th. And the 90 degrees was the rebound that swamped the north central area. Marysville and Concordia both hit those highs on the 7th. And we went on to see some other warm temperatures in the 90s on the 8th and 9th. So it has been a fairly warm week before we got slammed with the overnight cold wave.
And how cold did it get, and how far south did those freezing temperatures reach?
Well, the freezing temperatures ranged fairly far south. The coldest air was in north central and northeastern Kansas. We had temperatures in the teens in those areas, particularly the Belleville, Scandia area, also up in Hiawatha. So we were looking at 4 or 5 hours below 24 in parts of that north central area of the state. And as far south as central Kansas, we saw temperatures, again, below 24. So it was a fairly vigorous cold front. Unfortunately, that is not the last round of cold air that we're going to be seeing.
Well, temperatures that low for that duration, and we, of course, talked about this with K-State's Romulo Lollato earlier in the week, could put some of the winter wheat crop out there at risk, Mary, or potentially so.
Right. The wheat probably is not quite as far along up in that north central area as it is closer to the Oklahoma border. Mm-hmm. But again, we'll be seeing some risk with that. The biggest risk will be in fields that don't have a closed canopy yet. On the plus side, we do still have warm soils that can buffer that if the growing point hasn't advanced too far. We saw the low soil temperature still in the lower to mid 40s at the 2-inch level. So again, we're getting a little bit of heat from those soils. Question is how long those soils will stay warm if we have this prolonged cold spell.
Before we get into that, it's been a dry week around the better part of Kansas, we might note. So the drought monitor, which reads up to Tuesday, does indicate as well that the drought is intensifying in southwest Kansas.
Right. We had some expansion of the severe drought in that area. We did erase the abnormally dry conditions in northwest Kansas. That was a reevaluation of some of that rain to end March, and so that shows some improvement in that area. It can quickly reverse course as we're moving into our heavier rain pattern. We should be seeing more rain in April than we did in March. The encouraging note is when we look at the precipitation forecast for the 8 to 14 and the 6 to 10 is that it is favoring a wetter than normal pattern in that southwest corner where they desperately need some moisture.
We'll talk of the extended forecast for the balance of the state as well. What is rolling in this weekend? Chances of rainfall and cold temperatures on the heels of that again.
Right, and because we've got that cold air mixing in with that, there is a good chance of getting some snow or maybe even some freezing rain to go along with that rain, depending upon the timing of the moisture and that front. Amounts don't look to be particularly aggressive in that we're looking at maybe 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch, depending upon where you are in the state. The heaviest amounts in the east and lighter amounts in the west, but still we'll have to see how much is just wrung out with this cold air as they collide.
But once more, as you say, when the weekend is over, the freezing temperatures are not over. We'll have at least another bout with that in the early part of next week.
Right. It looks like there's a chance of freezing temperatures all the way through Wednesday night. And we're looking at highs in the 40s and 50s, so much colder than we would typically see by mid-April.
And then looking further ahead, and you gave us a notion of that here just a second ago, the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 days, there is moisture in those outlooks in keeping with this previous forecast of a wetter than normal April.
We do have a little bit of a chance in the 6 to 10 day, and that precipitation is favored for the southwest. Above normal precip chances covers all of Colorado, most of western Kansas, and into western Oklahoma. The eastern areas chances are for normal precipitation. Again, given the gradient that we see in the state, it takes a lot more to make normal precip in the eastern part of the state than in the western.
And on the temperature side, in the extended outlook, are we going to see warmer temperatures that endure for a time?
At this time, the temperature outlook favors colder than normal all the way through the 22nd. Indeed, if we look at the 8 to 14 day hazards, they've got a much colder than normal area of risk going through the 17th and 18th of April across all of the Central Plains. So basically, we're looking at most of next week having a fairly strong risk for much colder than normal temperatures. And it won't be just the wheat producers that are going to have difficulties with that. We've got a lot of people that have corn in the ground. Some of it may actually be up. And then they've got a lot of little calves out there, too, that will be stressed, especially if we get some cold rains to complicate matters.
Mary, thank you for the update, and take care.
Thanks, Eric, and best wishes to you and everyone for the Easter weekend.
You as well. Mary Knapp there, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. And we bid you a good and meaningful Easter weekend. Thanks for being along with us. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.